The idea for a finding for abuse is act, expenditure that no reasonable ordinary person would think is justified. And we've got a couple of examples. Bart Anderson's travels for the Central Ohio ESC, for example, would have been, I think, a prime candidate for a finding for abuse. The Van Buren School Board, some of you may remember this earlier this year. The Van Buren School Board, several members came to Columbus for a convention. They stayed at the Lofts, which is a very fashion-forward, upscale, urban loft-type setting. Very expensive, over $300 a night. Right next door, there was a Drury Inn, and I think the Plaza are both available at a half the price or less. So these are a couple of examples of the kinds of things that might lead to an abuse citation. Another one example, Randy Steps, the superintendent of Medina City Schools, and his contract that called for, I think it was $170,000 of student loans to be repaid. I mean, it was virtually his entire education, including all the stuff, his bachelor's and his master's, that had predated his employment at Medina, were all taken care of by Medina's taxpayer, city school taxpayers. So these are all examples that a reasonable, prudent person would not have agreed. Now let me distinguish for just a second, then I'll take any questions that you might have. This is not to quibble over small decisions. Management is entitled to a great deal of latitude. So for example, let's take the Van Buren School Board, and we have talked about the $300+ a night stay at the Lofts. If that was the only room available within a couple of blocks of the conference center, even though they could have stayed a half mile away at the Holiday Inn Express for less, probably not something that gets a finding for abuse, because that's within management's sound discretion to decide that proximity to the professional conference is critically important. So we're not talking about shades of gray here or going after people over a judgment call. We're talking about making a finding that where there's really no justification for it. It's somebody misspending money that belongs to the public. So that's what we're doing.
So how does this differ from findings for recovery?
Great question. Finding for recovery means we want the money back because it was spent contrary to law or stolen or without authority to do it. So sometimes, like the Randy Stepp contract, for example, they had the authority to enter into an employment contract and establish the terms. But there's a point at which it goes so far that it kind of shocks the conscience. Now, we looked at whether we could do a finding for recovery, and the law just didn't support it. And again, with the expensive hotel room example, the authority exists for the school board to get a hotel room at an educational conference outside in another city. So we really didn't have a basis legally for a finding for recovery, but we really felt that it was time that when we see things like this, we ought to at least shine a light and let the voters know that this is what's going on with their tax money. And if it's justified, I'm sure management can explain why it's justified and why, you know, only a 300 and some dollar a night room would do.
So there's a difference then with finding for recovery that they don't, you find that they did not have the authority to do that, whereas here they did have the authority, it's just, it's an egregious misuse of that authority. Is that?
That's pretty close, yep.
Okay.
And you've been able to have these things, you've had these things on audits now. Because haven't you cited some of the examples you've given us have been included in the audits?
So there are times that we talk about these kinds of things in a management letter, but we don't issue a finding as part of our report.
So what's different is now you're going to have a finding, did you call it, I haven't read the show, I'm sorry. Finding of abuse?
Finding of abuse. And again, this isn't something I'm making up. This is a standard that's promulgated by the AICPA, well grounded in the literature.
Have Ohio auditors ever used it before?
There have been a couple of isolated instances where a finding for finding for abuse was issued. But it's been very, very rare. And part of the reason that I'm issuing this for a comment period is I don't want, this isn't about gotcha. I don't want anybody to be caught by surprise. But at the same time, over the last 4 years, I've noticed that there are a small number of folks that tend to treat public treasury as their personal travel agent, and just felt that it was time to start making note of these things publicly.
Why haven't you used this authority before now?
I think people were worried about the perception of making a judgment call. If the law says thou shalt not, then it's pretty easy to say thou shalt not and thou did. It's another thing to say no reasonable person would agree that $300 a night next to a $129 a night hotel is reasonable.
Realistically, what do you sort of see the outcome of this being? Do you see, school districts or entities sort of being very careful about how they spend the money, or the fact that it's just sort of a gift to the voters? Do you feel that, they'll kind of ignore these findings? Is there a concern there?
Yeah, I think it's all those things. There is certainly a deterrent effect to this, and I hope that maybe people will think twice before they decide to treat a public trip as a side vacation. But in addition to that, at the end of the day, my office has the power of life. We don't get to sue for recovery. We don't get to actually, in most cases, go into court to prosecute anybody. What we do is the old Scripps Howard logo, or slogan, right? Shine light and the people will find their own way. That's what we do. But on the other hand, those whose deeds love the darkness tend to hate the light.
Do you expect any pushback, or have you gotten any pushback on this idea?
Well, we're just sending it out today for comment. It'll be open for comment for 30 days. So a month from now, I'll tell you what kind of pushback we got.
Have you talked with the legislature about this? Because we have some recent history of proposing a new initiative and then for some concern about it. Have you talked with the leadership about this idea?
I don't recall anything like that. Well, this is solely within the audits, the purview of an audit. It's an established professional standard by the American Institute of CPAs, and it's really unremarkable. We actually don't even have to be producing this bulletin. We're doing that because we don't want anybody to feel surprised. One of my office's core values is no surprises. Every audit that any of you guys ever see or write about was preceded by an exit conference where we sit down and go through the entire audit with the government that's being audited And they've been given an opportunity to respond in writing if they choose, before we publish. So I'm all about no surprises.
So is this gonna happen? Is there a reason why you wouldn't do this after this 30 days?
I think that the input we get is more likely to affect how we implement, not whether. That being said, a fool judges a matter before he's heard it. So while I can't imagine what it would be, I reserve the right to go, wow, I didn't think of that, and change my mind.
Why